What causes someone to be accident-prone, happiness-prone, relaxation-prone, or defeat-prone, physically awkward or clumsy, or frequently stressed out, tense and on edge, or apparently frequently unlucky and plagued by one problem after another? The easy answers are genetics or environment. To believe that somehow these things are beyond the individual control. But I have seen too many patients who have massively altered their self-images, expressed personalities, and life experiences to believe that. So I stand here as a medical doctor, a scientist, and a lifelong student of the mind-body relationship to tell you that whatever way you believe you are prone, accident-prone, unsuccessful relationship-prone, poverty-prone, whatever, I know that you can change that around. If you now believe that you cannot express yourself effectively and persuasively in front of groups or in high-pressure situations, I know that you can change that around. If you are a weekend golfer who has suffered with a wicked slice for years, I happen to know for a fact that you can change that around. If you're a salesman prone to frequent slups and big swings in income, I know that you can change that for the better. Go into the theater of your mind with me and let me show you a few quick clips on your movie mental screen. First, thousands of birds high in the sky, flying in formation from the wintry cold north, migrating to the warmer climate of the south. Second, a cute little squirrel born in June is busy gathering nuts. Next, we see it in January. The ground is covered with snow and ice, but the little squirrel is in his tree eating the nuts that he gathered in June. Third, we see an infant trying to pick up a shiny coin from a tabletop. His little hand zigzags towards the coin. He clumsily tries to pick it up and finally gets it. Next, we see the same boy at age 6 easily and instantly picking up the coin from a tabletop with no wasted motion, no frustration. What can we learn from these little movies? The migrating birds and the squirrel demonstrate that animals have a built-in success mechanism. The birds are directed to the warmer climate without a compass, and the squirrel gathers nuts even before it knows that winter exists. These animals have not been entrusted with the privilege of programming their own servomechanisms. Their creator pre-programmed their servomechanisms to ensure their survival and success. However, our creator gave us the power to choose our own objectives and do our own programming. Unfortunately, most people squander this power of choice. Think back to the child. His experience reveals exactly how our servomechanism becomes a success mechanism. The infant picks up the coin in an awkward manner until he becomes successful in the performance of this act. This success is now registered in the servomechanism. It can be recalled and used to repeat that success over and over again. Right now, your servomechanism is very well stocked with this kind of information, waiting for recall and use. It is also very well stocked with images of past failures. These too can be recalled and will govern present-day behavior and results. It's simplistic, but possibly useful to say that, with regard to a particular activity, what you recall controls what you do and experience now. History repeats itself, but you have a choice over which history gets the nod. Let's take an example. The salesman who has no trouble in selling the small deals to small accounts, but loses his cool and composure when talking to a really important prospect about a potentially large contract. Today he is scheduled to meet with Mr. Big and make a presentation that could provide the biggest order of his career. This salesman must make a choice. What images will he recall and focus on as he tosses and turns in his sleep the night before, as he gets dressed in the morning, as he drives to the appointment? He can certainly dredge up all the images of past failures when his hands have gone clammy and his tongue has tied itself into knots. But he could choose to search his entire memory and recall those times, and they are there, when he did perform effectively under pressure. He can go into his computer and pull up those times when he has been under great pressure, maybe when he interviewed for his job, when he coached his son's little league team in the championship game, when he faced up to a high school bully. If he chooses to call up these images, he will be giving a new and different command to his servomechanism. Hey, Look, I can perform under pressure, and this is the kind of experience I want you to provide for me today. I remember the very first time I spoke to a large audience. I was used to sitting in my familiar, comfortable office and talking to my patients one at a time, person to person. But this day, I was to speak to 3,000 people. The evening before my speech, as I began to prepare, I had a choice, didn't I? I could immerse myself in worry and anxiety. I could say, Maltz, what makes you think that you can hold the attention of 3,000 people? I could recall my earliest failures, being called upon as a student in class and embarrassing myself. I could energize my failure mechanism, or I could call up the image I had of getting a standing ovation from 100 or so people at the last church where I had lectured. I could remind myself that I had spoken on this very subject to 3,000 people. I had just done it one at a time. I could focus on the task at hand. I could energize my success mechanism. Why do so many people often relive the same disappointment and unhappiness over and over again? The person who loses his temper gets in a fight with his boss and gets fired not once but 3 or 4 times in a row. The person who has a decent golf swing when practicing but has his game come apart at the seams just as soon as he is playing for real. The person who has what he wants to say at the next company meeting perfectly rehearsed in his mind, but then clams up and sits there like a stump. When you understand how the servo mechanism works, this behavior becomes perfectly understandable and finally controllable, changeable. Let's take the first fellow. Mr. loses his temper and loses his job. If you could open up his mind and look at what's really in there, here's what you'd find. You'd see that he has recalled this unpleasant incident often enough that they have become a permanent part of his self-image. He now sees himself as Mr. Lose My Temper and Lose My Job. Next, you would see that in order to ease the pain of this terrible self-image, he has piled up a lot of anger and resentment, blaming everybody from his parents to his co-workers to his SOB bosses for, quote, making him mad. He is a boiling cauldron of unhappiness just waiting to explode at the next provocation. He has no question if he will be fired from his job after a violent argument. He just wonders when. He may try to control all this with teeth-gritted willpower, saying, I won't lose my temper, I won't lose my temper, I won't lose my temper. But that can't last because his willpower is incongruent with his self-image. Almost everything he thinks of energizes his failure mechanism. Some people are bullies as their response to a fearful, insecure, and threatened self-image. Some people attract problems as if magnetized as their reaction to an inferior self-image damaged by constant comparison with others. What happens to you in life, good and bad, is largely the result of your own reactions because of your self-image. If you have external life experience matters that you would like to have changed, the most direct and dramatic way of accomplishing this is to face up to your present-day self-image. The exciting thing is that except in severe mental illnesses that require professional help, this all-important self-image is something that we can change. We can change it ourselves without the help of doctors, without attending outrageously expensive seminars, without finding a guru, even without too much difficulty. Here are the critical assumptions important to this transition. 1. We have the power to alter our own self-images. 2. It is within our power to set realistic goals and take action to achieve them. 3. We must identify, acknowledge, and understand our shortcomings and weaknesses, but also learn to accept them as stimuli to improve and rise above them. 4. The internal changes in us will begin to take root when we realize the degree of control that we can exercise. Discovery of self-control versus circumstances beyond our control is very exciting and stimulating. And number 5, we can choose what images we can recall and construct a program, the servo mechanism, as a success mechanism. To me, this is very exciting. What cannot be accomplished with willpower can be by altering the self-image and reprogramming the servomechanism. You see, the secret of all human frustration is that we largely manufacture all the resistance we experience in life and victimize ourselves. To activate our automatic success mechanism, we must understand the power of habit force. Some habits are culturally determined. Almost everyone shares them in a given society. If you live in the USA, for example, I can predict that when you wake up of a morning, one of the first things you do is brush your teeth. Most Americans have this habit, and it's a good one. Your breath smells better, your teeth are healthier, and your mouth feels fresher. Some habits are more individual. A friend of mine, with whom I now and then debate philosophical questions, invariably gestures with his pipe when he makes a point. He has done this for as long as I can remember. If your habits are wholesome, you must be a happy person. If they are not, then you should make every effort to change them so that you can live a fuller, more vivacious life. And good habits are crucial to maintain your success mechanism. We hear so much about bad habits, we begin to think of all habits as bad. But habits can be good, even inspiring, and the whole art of living is to overcome bad habits and rise above them to habits that make for a good life. Think about the importance of habits. Your habits govern your life, and you need them to function in this world. To give an elementary example, upon waking on a weekday morning, you habitually brush your teeth, wash yourself, put on your clothes, button them, and eat some kind of breakfast. If you hadn't developed these and other socially acceptable habits, you would not be tolerated in your community. Without the aid of habits, you would be slowed down to a walk in your daily activities. You would be in conflict with yourself about the simplest functions. You would need a full 24 hours to get your day's work done, and you'd have no time for sleep. If you had to stop and carefully, consciously think about everything that you do, you simply couldn't live. Imagine wanting a drink of water. Now you must think, how do I get the water? Oh yes, I can go to the sink. Now, what do I put the water in? If I try cupping my hands, it dribbles out before I can drink much. Oh yes, a cup. That'll work. Now, where do I find one of those? How do you hold it? On which side do you drink out of? And on and on. Obviously, we don't do that. We have a thought, a command to the servo mechanism, I want a drink of water. Everything else is already automatic behavior. It is a habit that takes you over to the sink, sends your hand into the right cupboard, pulls out a cup, fills it but stops short of spilling. This is a clearly pretty useful habit to have. But useful as some habits are, other habits may be destructive. The person who automatically smokes 3 packs of cigarettes every day has formed a habit that is his implacable enemy. The person who instantly leaps into bullish argument and confrontation to resolve any difference, be it trivial or serious, is his own worst enemy. The person trying to lose weight habitually cleans her plate. She is in trouble. To understand how to manage our automatic success mechanism, we need to know how habits are born. The child growing up learns ways of doing things from his parents and later from his friends. Soon, these actions and thinking tools become a part of him. They become automatic. He repeats them again and again for months and years and perhaps for the rest of his life. Habit patterns operate not only in action, such as tying one's shoelaces or driving a car. Our emotional reactions and feelings also depend on habit patterns. You can develop the good habit of thinking of yourself as worthwhile, a constructive citizen with goals for every day of your life. Or you can think of yourself as a failure, a person of no worth, and this way of thinking is a habit. In his book, The Road to Emotional Maturity, Dr. David Abramson writes as follows. All of our habits, in fact, express something basic in us, since they reflect our unconscious feelings. This is the reason why we do not think of the way we eat, talk, or walk, or the way we carry out our daily routine. Pavlov's simple experiments with dogs were the first proof that habits were the result of preconditioned responses to a given stimuli, and that these habits would continue even when the situation no longer remained the same. To prove his theory, he held out a piece of meat to a dog and rang a bell at the very same moment. At the sight of the meat, the dog's salivary glands began to work. Each time Pavlov repeated this procedure, the dog reacted in this same way. Eventually, no meat was offered, only the bell was rung. The dog's glands still secreted the saliva because his reaction had become automatic and spontaneous. It was unconscious. It would be a long time before this repetitive pattern of action could be disassociated from the original factors that related to it. And so we see that while we accept our habits as a definite part of us, which was always there, when in reality they were acquired as we grew up. Just as Pavlov's dogs were conditioned, so are people. You can think of yourself as a winner or a loser. Either way of thinking is a habit pattern that can jet propel you towards life or force you to retreat into a shell. It can add fuel to your automatic success mechanism, or it can drain your tank. I know of a girl with a great talent as a pianist who got into the habit of thinking that she was incompetent. She told me how, when younger, she used to perform brilliantly at the piano keyboard, her ability outstanding. But yet if she made one small mistake, her mother would scold her severely. Her mother rarely acknowledged her talent, but harshly criticized her every error. Before long, she found herself to be error-prone whenever playing with her mother in the room. Alone, she could play flawlessly. As soon as her mother entered the room, a rush of images of her mistakes and being scolded flooded into her mind. Her failure mechanism responded, and she goofed up. Soon, this traumatized behavior expanded to playing with any audience. She could still play flawlessly and beautifully in private, but as soon as anyone entered the room, she tightened up and made mistakes. Today, she criticizes herself for the slightest mistake, putting her wonderful talent in a straitjacket. Her negative habit of extreme perfectionism has ruined a career that had every possible potential. Her empowered failure mechanism has robbed her of all enjoyment from playing the piano. Can you see how she's manufactured her own resistance? Can you see how that resistance to success and happiness has gotten bigger and stronger year after year? Now her self-image is that of a talented pianist who cannot perform in public, crumbles under pressure, is error-prone, and likely to embarrass herself even if she tries to play. Can she change all this around? Absolutely. Yes, she can. How? By altering her self-image. A healthy self-image allows us to acknowledge our shortcomings and accept our mistakes, but it also encourages us to work to improve, to be better than our shortcomings, and reminds us that we are not the same as our mistakes, so that we can rise above them. It is extremely important to understand that you are not your mistakes. You do make mistakes, but that is not the same thing as being a mistake. Do you have a habit of shutting down your success mechanism and energizing your failure mechanism by recalling only images of past frustrations? By incorporating only those images in your self-image? If you will face up to this punitive habit, you can free yourself from its vicious grip. It is interesting that there is an opposite sort of way many people strangle their success mechanism. Just as self-image of inferiority, anxiety, and sequential failure energize the failure mechanism and shuts down the success mechanism, so does an unhealthy, exaggerated, and therefore fragile ego. On one hand, an unhealthy self-image. On the other hand, an unhealthy ego.